Okay, I think we are good to go. I'm just getting stuff started up here. Good evening, everybody who's here. Hope you're having a good one. Um, we are couple tech notes for you. I still haven't heard from Den. I hope he's okay and alive and well. But I haven't heard from him. We do have someone else who is helping out with moderation today, Michael, and we're just trying to work to see if we can get him on the back end of things. But as soon as it starts working, and Michael, if you hear me, um, he should be able to moderate comments and he'll star anything for me that I need to look at between stories. But as always, if you want to support the channel, that's where you go, patreon.com/Hement. You could subscribe to my newsletter right over there. It's fun. Go do it. It's free if you want it to be free. And if you want to make sure I see something in between stories, you could leave a super chat. Otherwise, Michael will log comments as we are going through here. Okay, because there's so much to discuss, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Um, Let me pull up the stuff I need. The first one I wanted to share with you is there's actually some breaking news as of today. At least it was publicized today. A group of Christians are now suing the IRS in order to declare the Johnson Amendment unconstitutional. Basically, these Christian groups say we want to be able to endorse candidates for office of any kind. We want to be able to do that without losing our tax exempt status. The IRS is not allowing us to do that, at least on paper, and they want a judge to declare it unconstitutional. So that is what they are suing about right now. And let me show you this lawsuit here. This is the front of their lawsuit. You could see, we'll get to this in a second. But it's filed in the Eastern District of Texas, Tyler Division. We'll talk about that more in a second. But look at the groups that are filing this lawsuit. This was actually just filed Wednesday, but the articles about it are coming out today. It's from the National Religious Broadcasters Association, which is a very conservative evangelical group, Random Church, and another broadcasting group called Intercessors for America. So you have two Christian ministries that focus on broadcasting, and they're suing basically the IRS and the guy in charge of the IRS. And so, what is the complaint about? In order to make sense of this, because I know not everyone is familiar with the Johnson Amendment and the IRS rules, and it's all very complicated, let me try to break down the Johnson Amendment first, and then I'll get to what they're complaining about in the lawsuit. I hope it makes sense to like the 12-year-old who's watching who doesn't understand what's going on. Okay, basically, here's what you need to know. Just about every nonprofit group, including charities, cause-based organizations, churches, the ACLU, the National Rifle Association, Planned Parenthood, etc., they're all considered to be something called 501c3s. That's the IRS designation because they are nonprofits. What the IRS is saying is these groups are not trying to make a profit, they're trying to serve a greater cause. And as a way to encourage people to give money to those groups, contributions can be deducted on your taxes if you give them money. It's like a win-win for all sides, right? Now, for the groups to keep their 501c3 designations, there are some rules they have to follow. For example, they have to fill out paperwork every year that explains to the government this is how much money we made because of donations or grants. This is how much money we are giving out. This is how much salary our staff is getting, things like that. It's a way for donors to keep tabs on the groups they're giving money to, right? To make sure they are living up to their stated missions. Now, one of the caveats to all this is they're not supposed to play politics. They can always promote their hyper partisan causes. Like the NRA can say, these are the candidates who are good on our issues. Planned Parenthood can say, this Democrat gets an A plus rating from from Planned Parenthood. They can totally do that. What they cannot do is say, hey, everybody, go vote for this person. All right? They can't do it. Basically, we don't want them playing politics, even though it's okay to push their causes. Basically, that rule was proposed by Senator Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1954. That's why it's called the Johnson Amendment. Wasn't controversial, passed without any conflict about it, and it didn't become an issue until, decades later. So this has been around for 70 years. Now, houses of worship actually get an even sweeter deal because they are automatically given a tax exempt status the moment they form, and they don't have to fill out paperwork and send it into the IRS saying, hey, can we be a 501c3? No, the IRS says, oh, you're a church, you're automatically one. So very convenient. They also don't have to fill out that form that says how much money they took in and where it's going, which is very convenient for megachurches that give a hell of a lot of money to their pastors so that they can buy their mansions and everything. Like, we don't know how much money Joel Osteen makes as a salary. We don't know how much megachurch pastors necessarily make. And guess what? They don't tell it to their congregations either, because the last thing someone in the church wants to know is, wait, why is all my tithe money going to the pastor's cars and not mission trips overseas or something like that? And yet, despite that sweet deal, plenty of conservative pastors have been arguing for years now that these rules are too hard on them. And they've deliberately tried to get the IRS to revoke their tax exemptions so that they could file a lawsuit over it. Okay, so for example, several years during Barack Obama's presidency, for example, hundreds of evangelical churches participated in something called Pulpit Freedom Sunday. You could look that up on Wikipedia. And basically, they proudly endorsed Republican candidates from during the church services and then recorded it and sent the recordings to the IRS saying, hey, guess what? We're defying your rules and come after us. We dare you. And the IRS had every reason to take action and revoke their tax exemptions. They never did. And then over the past few decades, it seems like the IRS has only followed its own rules on the Johnson Amendment like once. Because before the 1992 elections, there was a group called Branch Ministries that ran full-page ads in newspapers telling people do not vote for Bill Clinton. And the IRS went after them. They revoked their tax exempt status. The ministry sued, but the IRS won. And that's pretty much it. Like, there is a government research institute that said another church lost its tax exemption in 2012, but like there were no details provided. And I have never heard of a second church officially losing their tax exemption at all. Even though all these churches are like telling the IRS, look what we just did, take it away. Now, by the time Donald Trump came into office in 2017, the violations were just getting more egregious. Like, you didn't have to have some concerted effort and mail stuff to the IRS because it was clear to even pastors the IRS is not coming after you. So there were a lot of pastors who told their churches how to vote. And it didn't really help that Donald Trump kept lying and saying he got rid of the Johnson Amendment. He did not. Like, churches have just been endorsing candidates ever since. And some of them endorse Democrats. I'm not going to lie about that. Some of them do. But by and large, this is overwhelmingly a conservative Republican thing. And they're the ones with the most to lose if the Johnson Amendment was ever enforced. This is interesting. In 2022, I've talked about this before. ProPublica published this fantastic article. Look at the headline right there. Churches are breaking the law by endorsing in elections. Experts say the IRS looks the other way. Really interesting article about all the horrible stuff these churches are doing. But let me highlight a couple things for you here. Look at this. The IRS has largely abdicated its enforcement responsibilities as churches have become more brazen. In fact, the number of apparent violations found by ProPublica and the Texas Tribune and confirmed by 3 nonprofit tax law experts are greater than the total number of churches the federal agency has investigated for intervening in political campaigns over the past decade. So, like, we know they're doing it, but the IRS isn't going after them. In response to questions, an IRS spokesperson said that the agency can't comment on, neither confirm nor deny, investigations in progress, completed in the past, nor contemplated. Like, asked about enforcement efforts over the past decade, the IRS pointed the news organizations to annual reports that do not contain such information, which is such a weird answer for the IRS to give. They're like, we're the CIA here. We can't tell you if we're investigating something. And if we were investigating them, we couldn't tell you about it. Let us point you somewhere else where we're not, so you can go down a rabbit hole that provides you no useful information. So, very bizarre. Later in this piece, there was also one other thing I found interesting. Where did it go here? I highlighted it. I swear. It's a very long article, but it's very good and worth reading. Oh, well, I'll come back to it. But this is what they were doing. Oh, here it is. Check this out. In a response to a Freedom of Information Act request from ProPublica and the Tribune last year, the IRS produced a severely redacted spreadsheet indicating the agency had launched inquiries into 16 churches since 2011. IRS officials shielded the results of the probes, and they have declined to answer specific questions. So the IRS, when forced to give up some information, said, yeah, we are looking into like 16 churches. We just can't tell you why or where they are or what's going on or if we did anything about it. And I promise you, there are way more than 16 churches that have been endorsing candidates, because we've like left-wing groups, church-state separation groups have documented this for a while. Okay. So the bottom line is the IRS is not doing its job. Okay. They're treating this like some national security issue, and it's not. And it also doesn't help that not that long ago, the IRS was accused of going after conservative churches. And in response to that bad faith accusation, they said, we're never going to investigate a church unless a high-level official in the IRS signs off on it. And for a long while, there was no one sitting in that seat. So basically, low-level employees couldn't do anything about it. Okay? So anyway, you get the idea here. This is the problem with the IRS. This is a problem with enforcement. And what's basically happening is if the IRS is not investigating these churches, as one constitutional lawyer put it, the IRS is essentially creating super PACs that are black holes, because churches can endorse candidates, tell their congregations to donate money and vote for those candidates, and they don't have to report where any of that money is going, where it's coming from, anything like that. Okay? So, here's where we're at right now. Like, either the IRS needs to eliminate the Johnson Amendment and just allow all nonprofit groups to endorse candidates and play politics, or it has to enforce its own rules, even if that means going after Christian churches. Okay? The irony of all this is that the church is trying to repeal the Johnson Amendment. They say they're doing it because they don't want to be beholden to the government. They want the freedom to preach whatever they want, including endorsements, and they don't want the government telling them what they can or cannot say. But if you get rid of the Johnson Amendment, you know what's going to happen? A lot of large evangelical churches are basically going to become tools of the Republican Party. Every week is just going to be a Trump rally, and you're going to learn jack about Jesus. Okay? So, like, this is going to backfire on them. So anyway, that's the Johnson Amendment. That's where we're at today. That's the backdrop for this lawsuit that came out this week, right? Even though the Johnson Amendment is never enforced, there's a lawsuit pretending that the Johnson Amendment is hindering the free speech rights of Christians, okay? This complaint says very specifically that, I want to show you some of this here. Plaintiffs, here's what it says in the lawsuit. Here we go. There we go. Look at number 11 here in the lawsuit. Some plaintiffs do not want to formally endorse or oppose political candidates. However, all plaintiffs desire to communicate their views about candidates' positions that are relevant to the issues plaintiffs care about. I'm going to pause right there. And they would do so, but for the Johnson Amendment. Let's pause there and say, guess what? They absolutely can communicate their views about positions or issues. That's what the NRA does. That's what Planned Parenthood does. It's never stopped them. But these people say the IRS operates in a manner whereby the plaintiffs are in jeopardy of punishment if they forthrightly say that a candidate's positions are unbiblical or that another candidate's positions are consonant with biblical teaching, the plaintiff's speech is clearly chilled in this regard because they are not free to proclaim their views on the issues of the day. Oh my God, someone get them a cloth so they can wipe their brow. Oh my goodness. When have Christian pastors ever shut their mouths about anything ever? It has never happened. Um, it's just ridiculous that they're saying this. Elsewhere in the lawsuit, check this out. This is number 32. None of the plaintiffs violated the Johnson Amendment, but all have engaged in self-censorship to avoid doing so and incurring the commensurate penalties provided in the whatever IRS code, basically. They're like, we're self-censoring ourselves. Again, as if Christian pastors have ever stopped themselves from saying whatever it is they want to say. I'm not gonna go through the entire lawsuit, but let me summarize some of the big things they point out. They say that because the IRS grants churches an automatic tax exemption, that they are automatically silenced by the government, which interesting. I don't think they are, but okay. They also say, guess what? There are a bunch of newspapers that are nonprofits these days, but a bunch of those newspapers endorse candidates before an election. How come they're allowed to get away with it and we can't? Interesting argument. We'll come back to that in a bit. They also point out in the lawsuit, there are many pages in the lawsuit of examples of churches endorsing Democrats. And they're saying, IRS didn't go after these people, so why are they coming after us? Which is a lie because they are not coming after Republicans and they're not coming after conservative churches that endorse Republicans. So ultimately, they say, where is this? I want to make sure I'm reading this correctly. Here we go. This is number 9 again. Back here. The IRS operates in a manner that disfavors conservative organizations and conservative religious organizations in its enforcement of the 501c3. This is a denial of both religious freedom and equal protection. It's a big right-wing conspiracy theory. The IRS is coming after right-wing churches, which is absolutely ridiculous. You know how I know that? Name one right-wing church, one evangelical megachurch that has lost its tax exemptions for endorsing a candidate. Hasn't happened. You won't find evidence of it anywhere. I've been looking. I haven't found evidence of it anywhere. And they also say, and this made me laugh quite a bit, this is in number 92 in the same document at the bottom here. Similar and even more explicit examples of support or opposition of candidates by 501c3 nonprofits go unchallenged by the IRS, especially if the candidates in question are from the Democratic Party. No, that's a lie. These churches go unchallenged because the IRS is not doing its job, not because they're endorsing Democrats. I know that because if they endorse Republicans, they also go unchallenged. I say that as someone who has desperately wanted the IRS to go after these churches for a really long time. And the last thing these plaintiffs say is they have to file this lawsuit. Why now? Because maybe you're wondering, they're only filing this maybe because they have lost their tax exemptions. They say, no, we have not lost our tax exemptions. They're saying the only way we could lose our tax exemptions is if we break your rules and endorse a candidate, then you would take away our tax exemptions. And if we lost the lawsuit, well, then we lose our tax exemptions. They don't want that to happen. They don't want their taxes to be in jeopardy. So what they're saying is we're filing this lawsuit now so that you can rule on this so we don't have to break the law to have legal standing to do this. Okay, so that's their lawsuit. I don't know if it should work. I mean, should is a keyword here. I think it should fail for a bunch of reasons. Let me try to explain this as a non-lawyer, okay? First of all, the people who want to see the Johnson Amendment enforced, it's not selectively enforcing the rule. They want it applied across the board, not to benefit one side or the other. Church-state separation groups are totally fine if historically black churches that typically endorse Democrats, we want them to lose their tax-exempt statuses too. We want it applied universally. And we think the IRS should be funded to the point so that they can investigate all these allegations. So it's not that anyone is saying we should only allow the IRS to go after one side or the other. The plaintiffs want the IRS to go after nobody. I want the IRS to go after everybody who's breaking this rule. So there's that. The other thing is that their cherry picked examples of who's violating the law are kind of laughable. Like, it is true, there are some churches that endorse Democrats, but by and large, and we've seen this through the media, we've seen this by their own examples, the most of the people violating the Johnson Amendment are conservative churches endorsing Republicans. And this lawsuit seems totally unconcerned about the right-wing churches endorsing Republicans. How do you fail to call out right-wing churches for doing the thing you're mad about, and then with a straight face say to the IRS, you're selectively enforcing your rule and not going after the Democrats and the churches endorsing Democrats? Like, if you were smart about this, you would think they would say, look, we have no partisan leaning here. We want you to go after everybody. Here are some examples of evangelical megachurches that endorse Republicans. We want you to go after them too. But they're not smart here. The people filing this lawsuit, not smart. So they're just saying you're ignoring the churches endorsing Democrats. So I don't think that's smart on their end. The closest they come to acknowledging that their side might do this too is that they mention a church in Virginia called Cornerstone Chapel. And right before the 2020 election, the pastor of that church, Gary Hamrick, basically told the congregation to vote for Donald Trump. I'm going to play you a clip of what he said, and then we'll talk about it right after, okay? This is Gary Hamrick, like in mid-October 2020.
Donald Trump is not our savior. Joe Biden is not our savior. Jesus Christ is our savior. And because he is my savior, as for me and my house, I will not vote for a candidate whose party platform advocates the murder of unborn babies, embraces same-sex marriage, encourages transgender behavior, and ignores God and His word in our culture. I cannot. I will not. Amen. Listen, if you in good conscience cannot vote for Donald Trump, then don't. But I don't know how, in good conscience, a Christian can vote for an agenda that is evil.
Okay, so pretty much an endorsement of Donald Trump. Did he also say, like, Democrats are encouraging trans behavior or something? Like, that's not how anything works. Did that guy attend the Richard Dawkins School of Trans People or something? Like, no, that's not how it works. But look at how the lawsuit spins that particular sermon. Okay, check this out. This is in the lawsuit here. Subsequently, the IRS began an enforcement action against Cornerstone Chapel on the basis of implicit support or opposition of political candidates. The IRS levied and Cornerstone Chapel paid a tax penalty for violating the Johnson Amendment. What? I mean, that's news to me. I went down a little rabbit hole today trying to find any media accounts or reports that this church lost its tax exempt status or even was investigated or even paid a fine over what that pastor said in that sermon. I could not find any instance of it. So it's actually kind of news to me that the IRS gave them a penalty of any kind and that this church paid it and apparently didn't make a big deal about it. But notice what they said, that the IRS levied and Cornerstone Chapel paid a tax penalty. That sounds like the IRS said, hey, you did a thing you weren't supposed to do. Give us, what, $1 because it's symbolic? Give us $1,000 because we want to punish you? Like, which is it? That matters. And that the church paid it. But notice it doesn't say the church lost its tax exempt status. I don't think it did. I went looking for that information too. I couldn't find it, but I'm pretty sure this church is still tax exempt. So what's the deal here? If the IRS investigated them, they didn't lose their tax exemption, I don't think. And so if this is the best example this lawsuit can provide over the IRS coming after a right-leaning church, then why the hell are they suing? Because it seems like they have it pretty damn good. I don't get it. Then there is the example of newspapers. Like 14 pages in this lawsuit list newspapers that they say these are all nonprofit newspapers that endorse candidates. And the lawsuit says if they can endorse candidates, how come we can't endorse candidates? Well, Religion News Service spoke to the first newspaper on that list, which got the most space, which is the Philadelphia Inquirer. And check out what they found here, because this is what the Philadelphia Inquirer said about all this. The Philadelphia Inquirer is owned by the nonprofit Lenfest Institute for Journalism, but the newspaper remains a for-profit public benefit corporation, said their CEO. As a for-profit entity, the Philadelphia Inquirer is permitted to publish political endorsements, as it has for decades, and it does so following thoughtful research on candidate policy positions, qualifications, integrity, and track record. That's nice. But basically, the lawsuit says, look, it's a nonprofit. Why are they endorsing candidates? And the guy running the newspaper is like, no, I know our parent company's a nonprofit, but we are actually a for-profit group, which is implying that the people behind this lawsuit do not understand the tax structure and what's permissible. But clearly they have looked into it and they're like saying, yeah, what we're doing is totally fine and above board. So the newspaper argument is ridiculous. But just for the hell of it, we can go ahead and say this. If media outlets are nonprofit media outlets, they should not be endorsing candidates. And guess what? They don't. They know better than that. If they do, they should be punished for it. So I'm not arguing that the IRS is selectively enforcing or not enforcing this rule. Like, if the IRS is not going after nonprofit media outlets that endorse candidates, it's not because the IRS is biased. It's because the IRS just isn't doing its job. So I don't get the argument that, the newspapers show political bias in the IRS. So that's ridiculous. And the last thing here is that this is a strategic issue to me. If the concern is that the IRS is harming houses of worship through the Johnson Amendment, you would think that the lawyers would say, yeah, we have a couple of Christian ministries mad about this. Let's pull in some Muslim organizations, maybe even some atheist ones, some Jewish ones, Hindu groups that all agree with us on this. That way we can go to a judge and say, look, we all disagree about religion, but we are all religious or non-religious nonprofit groups, but we all think the Johnson Amendment should be repealed. Like, if you took that to a judge, it would kind of be more convincing. And again, these are not smart lawyers. They're just like, we are a bunch of Christians, and we say this is bad for Christians. It just sends the message that we're talking about a small group of whiners rather than a systemic issue that affects everybody and needs immediate fixing. I don't get that either. Now, let me tell you the scary part about all this. I told you this lawsuit was filed in the Eastern District of Texas in Tyler. If you look up the website for the Eastern District of Tyler, check that out, Eastern District of Texas. I'm in Tyler here. There are only 2 district judges, this Kernodle and Barker. Those are the 2 judges that could theoretically get this case. You'll never believe this. They are both Trump-appointed judges, which is where you go if you're looking for an outcome and not actual legal responses to what you're doing. So we know what they're doing. They're going after, they're trying to get this in front of Trump judges because they know they're going to rule the way these conservative Christians want them to rule. Let me show you one other thing. Let me go back to the front page of this lawsuit. Did you notice who's filing this lawsuit? National Religious Broadcasters, Random Church, and Intercessors for America. Those 2 middle churches, they are listed in here, and they're listed as churches in the lawsuit where, like, the pastors want to say things, but they can't. But, like, why those 2 churches? Why are they in there? And the answer given by the organization that filed this lawsuit is that, well, these people wanted in on our lawsuit, and they happen to be in the District of Tyler. So that's why we filed it in this court. But let me posit a theory here these Christians only filed this lawsuit with those two small random churches because they knew if we get two churches that are located in this part of Texas, we'll be able to submit this lawsuit in a federal court that is guaranteed to get us Trump judges. That's why they chose not just those two churches, but two random Christian churches that just happen to be based in that particular district. They could have filed this lawsuit anywhere, but they did it there so they could guarantee they would get this in front of Trump judges. So that tells us the game plan here, right? The Christians want a Trump judge to strike down the Johnson Amendment, and they'll probably do it in a nationwide sort of way. And if anyone appeals that decision, they're hoping this goes all the way up to the Supreme Court so that their right-wing supermajority can put an end to this and declare the Johnson Amendment unconstitutional. And if and when that happens, churches across America would just become extensions of the Republican Party. That's where this is going. That's where they're hoping it's going. And I suspect you're going to see a lot more about this lawsuit in the next couple of days. And then as soon as you get that first decision from a judge. I'm going to pause there for now. And let's look at some of these questions. I hope we didn't miss anything. And Michael, if you are there, feel free to just push them up on the page and I will get to them as well. I haven't been able to chat with Michael, even though we talked over email a little bit before this. Let me look through here. Apologies for the delay. We'll figure this out in time. I see a couple of starred comments. This is a question. It's not even enforced. They don't have standing. No. Olivia, I assume you were referring to the plaintiffs in this case. And like I said, why do they have standing since they haven't lost their tax exemptions yet? And the reason they're arguing that they have standing is because, hey, they roped in these two rando churches that happen to live next to these Trump judges. So that's their argument for why they have standing. They're saying, look, we all want to endorse candidates, and these two churches want to endorse candidates, and none of us are doing it because we're really afraid of what the IRS might do. So just give us an answer now so we can just keep doing the thing we want to do. Yeah, very, very disturbing stuff right there. Okay, that was a sad story. I'm going to get to a slightly happier story. Give me 1 second here to pull up some stuff. Delete 3 million tabs. Let's talk about a happy story. It'll get happy. It's going to be annoying first. But you may have heard that a bunch of states are trying to get chaplains into public schools. And whenever they say they want chaplains in schools, we know that's almost always Christian chaplains in public schools. And the question is, well, what's it going to take to stop public school districts from inviting Christian chaplains into the building? We finally got an answer to that this past week in Florida, and it's kind of glorious. All right. So here's the backdrop to this story. Florida, earlier this year, back in April, they passed a law that would allow untrained Christian chaplains to volunteer in public schools, essentially not as substitutes for trained social workers and counselors, but kind of, but to supplement trained social workers and counselors. In Texas, they tried to do this last year, and really it was as a substitute. Like schools could hire chaplains to replace their counselors and some very disturbing stuff. In Florida, they had some caveats to their bill. For example, parents had to be informed about the religious affiliations of any chaplain on campus. They had to give written permission before their kids could see those chaplains. All chaplains had to pass a background check. And all that's well and good. That's the bare minimum you would want to expect, right? But here's the thing. We knew how this would look in practice, because if a school district ever approved that kind of program, because the state said it's okay, what would happen is there would just be a long line of Christian chaplains out the door, just waiting to get the green light to go into the schools. And since anyone can be a chaplain and there's no minimum, there's no barrier for entry here, like what's stopping a pastor from saying, hey, I need all men in my church to stand up Buddha, 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 you're all chaplains now. Come get your certificate, go to your local school district and sign up. What would stop them from doing it? It's how they handled like COVID exemptions too. You know what I mean? Like, so if they had the blessing of a local church, they'd be good to go. There would be nothing stopping those adults either from using public schools as target practice for conversions. All they need is permission from parents because they're Christians, and they could do whatever it took to lure kids into Jesus. Imagine for a second if a kid who is gay or trans went to their counselor and was like, I need help, I'm struggling right now. Next thing you know, their parents are like, why don't you see a chaplain? And that chaplain listens to the kid and says, you know what you need? Some conversion therapy and a little bit of Jesus, and we'll fix this right up. Like, what's stopping that from happening? That's bad enough when it happens at church, shouldn't be happening at school. And yet, Ron DeSantis signed this bill into law in April. And so now, where we stand is that the ball is in the court of individual school districts. They now have permission to say we're going to allow chaplains in our school district or we're not. And so that's what the Osceola County School Board was facing this month because school's starting back up. So they had to decide, are we going to let chaplains in the building or not? And what was amazing is that a couple of weeks ago when the school board met, I saw this headline and I was kind of surprised by it. Osceola County School Board delays vote on school chaplain program amid satanic temple controversy. And it's like, what is that all about? Basically, what they heard is that the satanic temple said, cool, you're going to allow chaplains in your schools? We want in. And then the board's like, oh, what? You mean there are non-Christians who want to participate in this? And so they're like, maybe we don't want to vote on this just yet. Let's look into this. Let's make sure everything's okay. And while they were delaying it, the Satanic Temple, check this out. They actually shared a tweet this is August 13th. In anticipation of the Osceola County School Board's vote on a school chaplain policy this evening, the Satanic Temple has sent a letter outlining what this could mean for the community. Stay tuned for more. And this is hard to read. I'm going to zoom in here. This is the letter they sent. But look at this. Top paragraph. While we believe that investing in licensed professional counselors would be more beneficial for Osceola County students, we are enthusiastic about the opportunity this policy presents for our ministers of Satan who are eager to build positive, supportive relationships with students and become an active part of the school community. And then if I scroll down here, the third paragraph, the response from Floridians interested in becoming ministers of Satan and satanic chaplains has been overwhelming. With hundreds of members of the Satanic Temple already in Osceola County, we anticipate a significant increase in satanic clergy members actively participating in the Osceola community in the near future. That's from Rachel Chambliss, the executive director of operations for the Satanic Temple. So that happened, and the board's like, we're going to delay our vote because this is not what we planned, which is great. The problem with that is that their next meeting was 2 weeks later, which is this week. So they were going to have to figure out what to do about all this. And the reason we're talking about Osceola County specifically, and this is kind of interesting, not only do they appear to be the first district in the state that is actively considering this measure, when Ron DeSantis signed this bill into law, he did it in the Osceola County schools. In fact, according to the Tallahassee Democrat, look at what the superintendent said to Ron DeSantis in April. It is an honor that you have chosen our community for today's signing ceremony. Thank you for your leadership to ensure our students receive the supports they need to be successful and for recognizing the role that spiritual guidance can have in enhancing the experience of our students. And there's Ronnie signing the bill at that school district. So, like, it's kind of embarrassing that that school district is now like, there's Satanists who want in? Maybe we should delay the vote here. Now, DeSantis, however, is part of the problem because when he signed this bill, he made a bunch of really stupid comments about it, specifically about the Satanic Temple. This is what he said at the time. We're not playing those games in Florida. He's referring to Satanists wanting in on this. He said, that is not a religion. That is not qualifying to be able to participate in this. Just imagine me with a higher voice and wearing high heels. That's Ron DeSantis for you. But he's saying we're not going to allow Satanists to participate. And later on, the Satanic Temple's co-founder, Lucian Greaves, said, despite DeSantis's contempt for religious liberty, the Constitution guarantees our equal treatment under the law, and DeSantis is not at liberty to amend the Constitution by fiat at whim. He just invited satanic chaplains into public schools, whether he likes it or not. Again, all of this was back in April when DeSantis signed that bill. And Satanists were like, oh, no, buddy, you signed the bill. We're coming. We're going to do this as soon as a district says it's okay for us, says they want chaplains in the building. And that's true. Like, non-Christian groups have every right to participate in the program. The Satanic Temple, by the way, is recognized as a religious group by the IRS. So if school districts allow chaplains in their building, but reject Satanists, that's a lawsuit waiting to happen. And it's not like Ron DeSantis is going to go out of his way to help any of those school boards, right? When a couple of weeks ago, when that school board delayed the vote, the reason they gave, the board chair, Heather Cahoon, said she wanted to think more about First Amendment concerns, and she was worried about federal litigation that we could receive if we were to approve this as it is today. And the reason she was saying that is because in response to all this, Ron DeSantis' administration released this on August 20th. Florida Department of Education announces model policy for volunteer school chaplains program. They're basically saying, hey, school districts, now that the law says you can have chaplains, here's a policy all of you can use. And basically, the policy is messed up. It's hard for me to show it to you. That's why I'm not showing it to you right now. But that policy appears to exclude certain groups. And the reason I can say that is because it defines chaplain as an individual who is officially authorized by the leadership of a religion under the religion's governing principles to conduct religious exercises, which is a very specific definition. And it also required chaplains to have a graduate degree in counseling or theology. And they had to have 2 years of experience as a chaplain. And this is the model policy. I'm not saying school districts have to do this, but if they adopt that policy, think about who that excludes. Christians have seminaries they can go to. They have chaplains who can actually get experience. But if you're like a non-Christian chaplain, you probably don't have 2 years of experience. You probably didn't go to school for it. It's a lot harder for you to meet these qualifications. And so the model policy that Florida gave to school districts basically shut out religious minorities. Another thing that model policy did is it gave principals the ability to reject volunteers if they felt those individuals went against the pedagogical interests of the school, which basically means principals would have a pocket veto over anyone who came and said, I want to be a chaplain in your district. And you know that some principals are like, I don't want that sort of power. I don't want to be able to say to a Satanist, yeah, you know what? You go against our schools, so we're going to say no to you, because that's a lawsuit waiting to happen. Americans United for Separation of Church and State, they released a statement after this model policy came out, and they're like, what the hell is this? Look at the headline on the left. Model policy for Florida public school chaplains is model of unconstitutionality. Look at this in yellow. The model policy would exclude some minority faiths or humanists, for example. Even some Christian traditions like Baptists, Quakers, and non-denominational congregations could be left out. And it requires school principals to determine if someone who applies to be a school chaplain is a member of a state-sanctioned faith. Principals must decide if the chaplain's religion is led by a hierarchy, worships a supernatural entity, and imposes moral duties. Telling principals they need to wade into theology to parse a faith's traditions, beliefs about the nature and existence of God, moral codes, and governance structure is not just unfair and unwise, it is unconstitutional. Also, if I may add, principals are busy. Don't add another thing like this onto their plates. So this is the model policy proposed by the state of Florida, by Ron DeSantis' administration. This is the policy the district was considering adopting. And then they were like, you know what? I think we're going to get sued. Why don't we delay this vote for now? And that brings us to this past week when they had their next meeting after delaying that vote. And the school board was like, oh no, we're going to vote on this tonight. But first, let's open the floor up to public comments about all this. And there was nearly an hour of public testimony. And a lot of those speakers were very much against the idea of bringing chaplains into schools. Okay. I'm going to show you a couple of these clips because they were really good. Here's a clip from David Williamson, who is a co-founder of the Central Florida Free Thought Community. Not a Satanist. He is a humanist. He is an atheist. And let me show you what he said. He actually pointed out that there were 257 religious congregations in Osceola County, and only 14 were not Christian churches. So if the school district adopted this policy, they were effectively shutting out religious minorities. Let me show you a clip of what David said.
If you're reconsidering draft policy 3.81, I'll point out again that Roman numeral 2, letter D, number 3 indicates that no matter what they say, as long as the chaplains believe it to be true, they cannot be accused of proselytizing. Calling kids severely mentally ill or victims of demonic possession, using threats of hell, are permitted by this policy as long as they believe it. I didn't make these things up. People in this room actually believe them. And if you're in the volunteer chaplain corps, that will be protected speech. If you think coaching will prevent that, you should seek legal opinions on what happens when the government attempts to tell clergy members what they can and cannot say. And according to Roman numeral 3, letter E, number 2, those conversations will be confidential and behind closed doors of an office paid for by our tax dollars. The ramifications of this are huge. The students will surely bear the brunt of it. For your clergy volunteer members as well, administrators will have to censor their remarks just to keep the peace. Assuming we even hear what was said in those confidential sessions. All this and more are why people are scared sick about a chaplain program. Not as much for the legal risk you're into, but the real harm that will be done when clergy are permitted to tell students what some of them really think about who they are, who they love, and how they act.
I love that. All of that's right on. And it's not even in your face. It's just saying this is a bad use of our resources. The fact that we lack transparency about this, the harm that could be done to kids if we allow this, it's just dangerous. Here is the other co-founder of the Central Florida Free Thought Community, Jocelyn Williamson. She also spoke out against the policy. This one's a little shorter, but I love what she said as well.
If we allow chaplains in our schools, we risk not only repeating, but also increasing this harm by spreading religion throughout the school experience, especially for marginalized students like LGBTQ youth and others who already struggle to be accepted. Please protect our schools as places of inclusion and acceptance for all students by rejecting this proposal. Let's ensure every child can thrive without fear of being judged or excluded. Thank you.
So again, very nice speech. There were so many of these over the course of an hour from people who were not just non-theistic. There were religious people speaking out against this too. But guess who else showed up at this meeting? Lucian Greaves of the Satanic Temple, who had no problem just laying in to the school board. Let me show you a bit of his.
Some of your churches have not had the best records regarding childcare and safety. Maybe your church has had no such problems, but you cannot keep this program contained to your church. You cannot keep this program contained to your religion. Governor Ron DeSantis lied to you from the podium during a press conference after signing the school chaplain bill into law. He declared that Satanists would be disallowed. Such proclamations hold no legal weight and do nothing to overturn the Constitution, which guarantees religious liberty for all. Similarly, your Department of Education has released recommended policy guidelines that attempt to narrow the definition of religion to exclude Satanists. This also holds no legal weight and defies all relevant legal precedent. So the short of it is, you're voting on a policy that is unpopular, divisive, poorly planned, obviously dishonest in its goals, unnecessary, and introduces new risks to children, even if you are allowed to implement it according to your wishes. The reality is you'll have to accommodate religious identities you may not agree with. You will end up with Satanist chaplains. Vote how you will. Good luck, and God bless.
Love that ending. You will end up with Satanist chaplains. Vote how you will. Like, it wasn't just atheists and Satanists, though. There were a lot of community members speaking out against the policy, including Christians who knew pushing their faith on students wasn't the job of the public schools. So, at the end of those public comments, it was time for a vote of this 5-member school board, and the board voted 3-2 against bringing chaplains into their schools. They said this is not a good idea, so they turned it down, at least for now. Like, there were just too many legal concerns about adopting the policy that the DeSantis administration released. And they want to get more lawyers on this to make sure that they can approve it in a legal way, and what the ramifications of that might be if they pass it. So for now, though, they shot it down. That is a huge victory for Satanists, secularists, church state separation advocates, and, people who actually give a damn about children. It was also infuriating, though, for the 2 board members who supported the proposal. One of them was Scott Ramsey, who is a DeSantis appointee to this very board. And the other guy was a guy named John Arguello, who made a statement before the vote where he is trying to explain why they need chaplains. And you could tell he's just out of his mind. Let me show you what he said before the vote. And keep in mind, he knew he was probably going to be on the losing end of this.
Wow. I mean, if that's the way that you fight for the community, I hate to see the way that you fight for your family in need. The adherents to the radical leftism are the other side, by the way, and I wanted to make sure that that's clear. These are ideologies that are fighting against this program. Number 2, if there was a student who came up here asking for, hey, I want to be chemically castrated because I'm a transgender ideologist, the school board members on this dais would pay for the Uber to send that student to go to the clinic. But here, in this situation, a student comes and they ask for spiritual guidance because they need something that is different than what we're offering, and they want to cut it down or provide some lukewarm voting because they're running for office. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. We can gaslight and obfuscate and confuse and deceive. But all those things are very clear to the people who love their children. And that's not what's being protected here today, as you can see. We can be honest, or we can be crazy and mentally ill. You can choose that. You can choose that. But those things don't bother me and they don't scare me, and I'm not going to be intimidated by a bunch of crowds of people who don't care anything about our kids. Because I'm actually a man that will fight for his family and fight for his community, and I don't care what all these crazy people say.
Did you hear when he made that line about, like, I can't believe there's a guy on the school board who says something like, oh yeah, like, if there was a hypothetical student that said, I want to be chemically castrated because I'm a transgender ideologist, the school board members on this dais would pay for the Uber to send that student to go to the clinic. What is he talking about? That's not how anything works. Nothing like that happens ever. And this dude is on the school board. And by the way, you probably are not, because you don't run for that position. But that guy ran for the position and he's there. And then he said later, we have like 2 options. We can be honest and bring on the chaplains, or we can be crazy and mentally ill. Apparently, that's the other option here. And I don't know if you heard when he said that horrible stuff about trans people, you could hear people in the crowd like gasping, like, what? Shame. So after the vote that this guy lost, he was so mad. Look at what he said to a local news outlet right here. The program is dead. The school board of Osceola County allied itself with the Satanic Temple in killing the program. And it's crazy that the majority of the school board here in Osceola County allied itself with the Satanic Temple. Listen, I don't work for the Satanic Temple. I'm going to go out on a limb and say the Satanic Temple did not just gain 3 new members from that school board. These people are just like, you know what? If we say yes to chaplains, we're going to have to think through the legality of all this. So maybe we should spend more time doing that. And this guy's like, what? No, I want to make a hasty decision right now. That guy might have also been mad because he just ran for the Florida State Senate and lost in the Republican primary. I don't know. Now, here's the thing. None of this means the proposal is dead for good. A committee is now going to look at the Florida model policy. They're going to make suggestions in order to avoid legal conflict. It is possible they will pass this policy later on, but in some revised way. Other school districts in Florida have to make similar decisions. I don't know what they're going to do. But for now, like the outrage and the backlash and the intrusion, the pleasant intrusion of Satanists and humanists has had a very real effect. Students in Osceola County schools will not have to defend themselves from predatory Christians who see them as targets because atheists and humanists and Satanists spoke up. Like, if they need help right now, if the kids need help, they can rely on trained professionals who take their job seriously and who Florida school districts ought to be hiring more of. Like, if the board wanted to help those students, they should hire more of those people. Instead, though, guys like the one I just showed you say they plan to resurrect this motion at the next board meeting, which is on September 10th. So, if you live in the area and you want to speak out against this policy, September 10th is a board meeting. Go there and speak your mind and let them know why this is a bad idea. But for now, excellent. The Satanists and the humanists got this thing stopped temporarily. All right, I'm going to pause there for now. I did enjoy I enjoyed this. Headline should read, Florida man invites Satanists into schools. Perfect description of Ron DeSantis, not thinking through whatever it is he's thinking of. This is nice from Steve. No, this is not nice. I've had a pastor doing therapy for me. I want such professions left to experts. And that's the thing, like, if you are going to a therapist because they are Christian, or they're seeing you because they're Christian, or your pastor told you to go see this person, you don't necessarily know what their training is. It could be a gay child who is sent to a therapist who doesn't understand anything about that and gives them a lot of misinformation, if not harmful information. That could be dangerous. But also, if you're talking to them, they are not trained with, modern understanding of what's going on in the world. They're trained from the Bible and using the Bible as a basis. And like, look, if that's what you want, fine. But for other people who actually want help, it's not good. And plenty of people have had those experiences and it's left them with a bitter taste in their mouths. I appreciate this donation, Keith. Thank you so much. And happy birthday, Blazed Bunny. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Let me see if there's anything else I am missing for the moment. Otherwise, I'll jump to the next story here. Give me one moment to pull it up. This is actually another kind of happy story, too. Okay. I actually talked about this maybe a few weeks ago. It wasn't that long ago. But the story is that there was a Republican running for the mayor of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And you would think, Republican, Oklahoma, that's probably good, right? For the Republican who's running. Well, this guy's name was Brent Van Norman. He was the main Republican in that race for mayor of Tulsa. And the reason I talked about him a couple of months ago is because last month he spoke at the church of a guy named Jackson Lahmeyer, who is a Christian nationalist, a failed U.S. Senate candidate. But he spoke at this church and he actually said some really disturbing things. One of the things was he fantasized about going back to a time when all public officials were Christians. And he bragged about how he was a Christian and that's why he should be mayor. Let me play you that clip.
I am unashamed of the gospel, for it's the power of God unto salvation. My number one qualification for being mayor of Tulsa is that I am an unashamed follower of Jesus. Without him, I can do nothing. And I think that if you go back and study the history of our nation and our founding, one, the pulpit was the primary tool for the Revolutionary War, communicating to people. But two, public officials had to be Christians in many areas. And we've gone so far away from that. And we need to get back.
Like, what is he talking about? None of that is accurate. I mean, as I said in the previous video, and you could see that video, like being a Christian was never a requirement anywhere for any office in the United States. I mean, obviously, there were some places where there was a requirement that you had to believe in God, but it didn't specify which one. And of course, those are non-enforceable today. I'm not going to go over all that now. I will say, though, if your primary qualification for mayor is your religious label, you're not a good candidate and you shouldn't be running for anything. Okay. But the Tulsa World newspaper asked him about all this, and like, are you saying only Christians should be in public office or something like that? And as I said before, he totally backtracked on all of this. No, 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 no. My point would be that I think people that are informed by Christian values make good public servants and they have a servant's heart. You see, you guys, he wasn't saying non-Christians can't do the job, only that Christians and only Christians can do the job better. So stop taking words out of his mouth somehow. Whatever. It was a bad answer. So the reason I bring this guy up again is that this week we actually had the election in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They had this election, and he was the only Republican in a race against two viable Democrats. There were a couple other people on the ballot. They weren't serious candidates, but two other Democrats were on the ballot. And I didn't like the sound of that because that makes it sound like the two Democrats will cancel each other out and then the Republican will surge ahead. But guess what happened in this vote? Check this out. Let me show you this. Tulsa mayor, if anyone got 50% of the vote, they would be mayor. If not, then the top two go to a runoff on November 5th. Look at this. Brent Van Norman, our buddy right here, took third place, 31.8% of the vote. He was beaten by two Democrats, Monroe Nichols, who, if elected, would be the first Black mayor of Tulsa, site of the Tulsa Race Massacre. So that would be symbolic and important. And Karen Keith, as far as I could tell, is another fine Democrat. That would be a female mayor of Tulsa as well. Both of them beat this guy. Even Republicans weren't enamored with this guy. And I don't know if it's because he was pushing that Christian nationalism angle. I don't know if it's because when he was speaking to that pastor, they also had this exchange. I forgot to mention this today, though it was in the last video. The pastor asked Van Norman, how many genders are there? And Van Norman responded, there are two. And let me give you the scientific definition of a woman. Scientific definition of a woman is it's an adult with two X chromosomes, period. And then Lehmeyer said, he's qualified to be mayor. He knows what a woman is, which is just the most reductive, biologically not true bullshit. So Republicans weren't enamored with this guy. They also didn't like the fact that Van Norman basically moved to Oklahoma 3 years ago because whatever, his kids were there or something. And within 3 years, this guy's like, you know what I should do? I should take over Tulsa. I don't think that played well with anyone in the city. So this guy lost the race. I mean, it was very close, like I showed you. It was a very close race, but the bottom line is Brent Van Norman lost. Two Democrats beat him, and those two will go to a runoff in November. When they interviewed Brent Van Norman after Tuesday night's election, I was actually kind of surprised he said this. We're disappointed. We certainly didn't get in this race to finish third, but it is what it is. Congratulations to Monroe Nichols and Karen Keith for the job they've done. I wish them the best. Yada, 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 the volunteers. Which, that's a fine statement. That's what you want to hear from a losing candidate in a democracy, right? Like, this guy just accepted the results and he'll move on to doing whatever it is he does, which is kind of good. Isn't that weird? I don't know. That the fact that he just said, well, I lost and those two won. Good luck to them. That seems so novel from a Republican these days. If you want, if any of you are watching this on YouTube, I encourage you, Google the Tulsa World newspaper and look up the election night watch parties for those mayoral candidates, because those two Democrats, when you look at the pictures of the people in their restaurants or the rooms or whatever, it looks like all of humanity. And when you look at the watch party for Brent Van Norman, granted, they are sad because they could see the results coming in and it's not good. It looks exactly what you think it would look like. Just saying. So, you know, the good news here is even in Oklahoma, I know it's a blue island in a very red state, Tulsa, But like the inclusive candidates came out on top, and the religious extremist who parachuted into the state a few years ago only to think he deserved to be mayor and that God supported his mission lost. So, yay, there is hope. I am seeing this comment right now. Van Norman has stated he wants a recount as of today. I didn't see that. I have no reason to doubt you. But even if he has a recount, he was behind by enough that it doesn't seem like the recount's going to change anything. So he's still going to lose. And a recount's fine. You can have a recount, but after the recount says you lost, go away. You've lost. You know, that's how it works. So I don't know. I was pleasantly surprised to see an update to that story. And yay. Yay. Okay, I got a few more here I wanted to share with you. Give me a second to pull this up. I don't know if I missed anything. I'm just double checking. I hope I didn't miss anything. Okay, I'm going to move on. Let's talk about Kentucky. Especially if you live in Kentucky, I want you to listen to this. There is an amendment that will be on the ballot this November in Kentucky only that basically asks voters, do you want to decimate the public schools in our state and funnel millions of dollars to religious indoctrination centers? And the answer to that is no. But let me show you what the amendment is, because this would change Kentucky's constitution. Here's Amendment 2. And it basically, look at the word salad here, because this is what will appear on the ballot. To give parents choices in educational opportunities for their children, are you in favor of enabling the General Assembly to provide financial support for the education costs of students in kindergarten through 12th grade who are outside the system of common public schools by amending the Constitution of Kentucky as stated below? It is proposed that a new section be added to the Constitution of Kentucky to read as follows. The General Assembly may provide financial support for the education of students outside the system of common schools. The General Assembly may exercise this authority by law, sections, blah, 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 of the Constitution notwithstanding. Which is, again, I'm sure they have to say it that way in some parts, but like, what does that mean? Basically, the Kentucky Constitution says taxpayer dollars can only be used to support the common schools, which are public schools. You can't fund anything that's not a public school. And what this amendment is saying is, should we undo that? Should we add a line that says, yeah, we can ignore that. We can fund private schools and religious schools and anything we want. That's the amendment that's going to be on the ballot, okay? So they're using the euphemistic language of school choice, and they want to create a voucher program that would funnel taxpayer dollars to private schools. And most private schools are religious schools, and most religious schools are Christian schools. And by the way, most of those Christian schools are attended by families that can already afford them. They don't need the vouchers. So that's what's on the ballot this November. And right now, Kentucky is one of the few states, one of many states that doesn't have a voucher program. I think they're one of the only states in the South that does not have a voucher program. But as the Washington Post, they had this great article back in June about voucher programs. Look at this headline. Billions in taxpayer dollars now go to religious schools via vouchers. And look at, I want to show you this map right here. Look at the schools with voucher programs. And you could see like some of them have universal vouchers. Some of them have smaller programs. The dark blue are really the ones with the most damaging voucher programs. And they're the states you would kind of expect. Texas hasn't gotten there yet. They're trying to. But Florida has these programs. Kentucky, though. Kentucky is one of the only ones that does not in that part of the country. I happen to be from Illinois. We sure as hell aren't going to give them vouchers to private schools. So yay for us. But anyway, that's what they're trying to change. That's what Republicans in Kentucky want to change. And in this article, check out some of these facts here. Billions in taxpayer dollars are being used to pay tuition at religious schools throughout the country as state voucher programs expand dramatically and the line separating public education and religion fades. And some of these programs, they're offering up to $16,000 per kid per year. That is taxpayer money that they are giving to those kids to attend a Christian school if they want to. So that's disturbing. In just 5 states with expansive programs, More than 700,000 students benefited from vouchers this school year. The programs, popular with conservatives, are rapidly growing in GOP-run states, with a total of 29 states plus DC operating some sort of voucher system. So, lots of money at play here. This is very disturbing. It's also disturbing here when you realize this: when vouchers for students with autism and other disabilities who typically seek specific services are removed from the list, the portion going toward religious education rises to 98%. Like, what the hell? That's disturbing as well. How much money are we talking about? Well, let's look at Arizona. In Arizona, in 2022, 2023, 3/4 of the money, about $229 million, went to 184 vendors. Most of that went for tuition, 87% to religious schools. Like, so much money to religious schools. In Arizona, though, the cost of universal vouchers has exceeded the $624 million budgeted for this year, contributing to a budget hole that lawmakers have not yet said how they will fill. That budget crunch could affect public school spending and certainly makes any increases unlikely at a time when public schools are struggling. Arizona schools are not able to pay for teacher pay raises or desperately needed resources. You just have teachers begging for copy paper and markers. It's so bad. This is robbing our local public schools and our most vulnerable students. And now Kentucky wants in on that game. That's how disturbing this is. So there is a left-leaning group, but they actually looked into this. And let me show you this study. They just put out a report from the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy. They estimate that if Kentucky were to adopt an educational voucher system like Florida's, it would cost Kentucky $1.2 billion a year, enough to pay for nearly 10,000 public school teachers and employees. Florida's voucher system is the largest of its kind. If they did a smaller model similar to Arizona, it would cost Kentucky $200 million annually. And that's still about 1,650 Kentucky public school employees. So this is what Kentucky is considering if they pass this voucher plan. It would be between $200 million and $1.2 billion a year, a difference of $1 billion. And that's money coming out of public funding, taxpayer money, and going to private, mostly religious schools. It's not like Kentucky is already ranked really high, by the way, when it comes to public schools. But this is, and look at that last line here. But first, voters would have to approve constitutional amendment number 2. So this is what Kentucky could do if they wanted to. Like, it's a horrible idea for so many reasons. And as one of the director of the group that did that report said, Amendment 2 would provide a blank check to the legislature to allow them to fund private schools for the first time. And by the way, another report said this would hurt rural Kentucky more than anywhere else. Let me see if I could pull that up here somewhere, because I found that also to be very disturbing. Is that here? Here we go. This is in the same article. Here we go. Yet a voucher system could disproportionately impact poorer rural counties where property values are low and therefore generate less property tax revenue for schools than in districts with more valuable real estate. So you get the idea here. If you're taking public money, putting them into private schools, you know who's not getting public money? It's the districts where they're also not getting property tax money. Like, those are the schools that need state help the most. And now we're taking that money from them and putting it into private religious schools. Like, it would hurt rural counties. And guess what? There's a whole bunch of them in Kentucky. So very, very disturbing stuff overall. It would also create additional problems too. Think about this, if parents decided to homeschool their kids, they would be eligible to get thousands of dollars per kid per year to do that. And that would mean not only is that bad for public schools, homeschooling is already not well regulated. So these parents would get thousands of dollars per kid in taxpayer dollars with very little oversight, if any, into what they're teaching their kids. And the problem with homeschooling, one of the many problems with homeschooling, is that the state doesn't even know if those kids are getting an education. And it's so rife with abuse because kids don't get an education. They don't know they're not getting an education. And the parents are like, don't touch me. You can't get around. You can't ask me what I'm teaching my child. That's government intrusion. Like Kentucky's laws are famously bad regarding what parents are required to do if they're homeschooling. And here's another loophole I did not anticipate. Okay. This is from an op-ed written in the Lexington Herald Leader. Someone pointed this out. Even worse, a church school could accept a child's voucher money. Then, for reasons real or contrived, they could kick the child out a month or two into the school year and keep the tax dollars they've already collected. So all the more incentive to say yes to admit anyone they want to, and then kick them out because of whatever sin you want to pretend is going on. So that's another loophole Kentucky would need to think about. By the way, in Indiana, that same person pointed out, lawmakers gave $439 million to private schools via vouchers, and church schools got 98% of that amount. And again, what is this money being used for? It's not education. They're funding creationism, homophobia, anti-trans misinformation, Sunday school nonsense. You know what they're not teaching? Comprehensive history, sex ed, proper science. And now Kentucky is like, we should try that. We should try not teaching our kids and see how that goes. Like, taxpayer dollars should not be used to prop up religion. And instead of giving money directly to churches, conservatives have figured out a way to give it to religious schools while destroying public schools and legal precedent along the way. So Amendment 2 is not going to make life better for kids in desperate need of a good education because the law isn't meant for those kids. If you wanted to help those kids get a good education, fund the public schools so all those kids could get a better education. Like, they are hurting public schools. And if public schools struggle, that has a ripple effect throughout the state. And after making public schools worse, you know what conservatives are going to do? They're going to say, well, public schools suck. So, we should give more money to private religious schools. Like, the people who live in religious bubbles do not care about life outside their bubble. That's how selfish they are here. They're willing to let others suffer in the long term as long as they get to benefit in the short term. I actually showed you a video, I think, last week of a pastor from Florida urging other pastors to launch their own church-based schools so that they could get taxpayer dollars in Florida and use that to baptize kids and convert them. Like, providing kids with a quality education is not a priority for these people. A state's education dollars belong in public schools, not church basements. So again, Kentucky courts so far have stopped all this from happening because the Kentucky Constitution says all public money goes to common schools, public schools. And that's why Republicans are now trying to pass this amendment to upend that. And I should say kudos to Andy Beshear, the governor of Kentucky, because he's come out proudly against this amendment. Here's Andy Beshear. Public dollars should only go to public schools, period, Beshear said. I am against this constitutional amendment, and if they pass it, I will work every day to defeat it at the ballot box in November. Well, they did pass it. Now it's his job to defeat it at the ballot box, and hopefully the sort of people who elected Andy Beshear, and maybe even others, will say, no, we like our public schools. We like our teachers. We want them to be teaching our kids. That would be the smart thing to do. So, Kentucky people, vote no on that amendment. That's the smart thing to do if you care about kids and if you care about education. I'm going to pause there. Oh, what other questions we got here while we're going through all this? Just checking to see if I missed anything. I don't know who the troll is. I'm sorry. Just checking through stuff. Let me pull up the next story here. I got a couple more. The next one will make you mad. But I think you'll find it amusing in some ways. Close the tabs. Okay. I'm just going to go ahead and get to the next story here. For the past 2 years, actually, I'm going to start that again. For 2 years, a guy named Jordan Cernick taught high school English in the Argyle School District in Wisconsin, relatively rural school district. He signed up for a coaching gig, as many new teachers do. And as far as I could tell, his evaluations were fine. But during his second year, and mind you, a second year teacher probably does not have tenure, the district instituted a new policy requiring teachers to use the names and pronouns of all their students, including their trans students. And this guy got mad. Cernick refused to do it, he said, because it would violate his Christian beliefs. And then here's the thing. The school's like, oh, God, it's one of you. So the school tried to accommodate him to the point of absurdity, I think. For example, he said, what if I just don't use any of my students' names? What if I just do this if I'm calling on them? Or maybe I'll just do like nod in their direction if they're raising their hand. And the school's like, yeah, you could do that. And at one point he offered to call, there were actually 2 trans kids in his classes. So this wasn't just hypothetical. But one time he offered to call a trans student by their last name, which is not what he was doing for other students, as like a middle ground. And the student said yes, because I don't think the student wanted to start a fight or anything. But it turns out that student's dad worked at the school and said, hell no, you don't. You call my child by my child's name. So that didn't work out. And at some point, it became clear that this guy was treating the trans students. Here's our buddy Cernick, by the way. Here he is, like, ready to not teach children, apparently. So at some point, it became clear he was treating the trans students differently. And so in 2022, there was a letter that was sent to him from a district administrator. And I want to show you what they said here. This is a wild letter from the district. Check this out. And I know it's hard to read. There's a lot going on here. Look at the top. We have had several conversations regarding the use of preferred names with your students. But look at the second paragraph. Students and their families have reported several concerns. There have been reports that you have continued to use the wrong names for transgender students. As a short-term solution, while I continued to consider the issue, you agreed not to use any name while referring to trans students. However, it is now clear that this solution is not going to work. So this goes on for a while. But they're saying, look, we tried to work with you. It's not working. This is bad. Okay. So at this point, the same letter said, this is important. Let me show you this. Sorry, I clicked out of it. Therefore, effective as of today, I am unequivocally directing you to do 3 things. 1, refer to students by the name consistent with their gender identity when instructed to do so by the district. That's good. Nice. Number 2, your substitute teacher class lists and seating charts need to reflect the students' names that are consistent with their gender identity. Which again, like, you realize you can't point or nod when you're looking at a seating chart, or if a sub is in the classroom and needs to know who the students are. So you got to do it for that stuff, and then comply with all lawful directives from the district's administration. So pretty much they laid down the gauntlet there and said, listen, follow our rules or else, right? So then Cernick decided to respond to all them. And he's like, I looked at the letter, and you know what I think? I think I'm not going to do any of this. Let me show you what he wrote. This is in his letter. What's the date on this thing? November 8th, 2022. I'm just going to scroll down to here. I have only acted according to the rule of my conscience, which is governed and held accountable to God, the one to whom all creatures owe their allegiance. It is before God alone that we must all stand to be judged someday. It is He and He alone, buddy, that should be capitalized, I think, if I were you, who initiates biological sex, human identity, value and worth, and all truth. If my religious beliefs and personal liberty place me at odds with the school district of Argyle or even the United States Department of Education, then so be it. And then he painted his face and yelled freedom and rode off on his horse or something like that. Like, and the weirdest thing he said in here, oh my God, where is the line? Look at this paragraph up here. It's right above that paragraph. Sorry about this. Look above my head. It was communicated in the letter that I have continued to use the wrong names for transgender students, emphasis mine. This cannot be the case, since the name I call each student is legally and objectively his or her own name from birth. Therefore, I would argue that I am calling students by their right names. Like, what a dick. He's like, I looked at their birth certificate and therefore I'm technically right. But really, what did he do in that letter? He admitted that the district was right, that he's not following their rules. And that means he's opening the district up to legal liability because he's discriminating against his trans students. So, what happened here? That was his second year of teaching. And the district said, you know what? We're not going to renew your contract for year 3. And before the school board could affirm that decision, this guy made a speech in front of the school board. And I wanted to show you some of his speech to the school board. I want to remind you, this is the speech he made to the school board to say, you should keep me here. And instead, he's still doing his Braveheart type of speech. My immediate goal is simple: to proclaim truth to a deceived world. Throughout the US, students are showing increased signs of anxiety, fear, and attempted suicide. The solution is complex, but it starts with rebuilding a foundation of morality and truth on which to build our lives. Our kids need stability and security, and that comes from unchanging truths that have existed since the beginning of time. A kid can go outside and know he won't tip over because gravity is a real thing. There's a lot of fear and worry today because kids are unsure of what's true anymore. Furthermore, I am committed to truth and reason with capital letters, which both teach and affirm only 2 sexes, male and female. There is no room for deviation. Our Creator made the world that way. He made each of us with worth, value, and dignity. To play along with the farce of gender identity, like many adults are doing today, is to lessen the dignity of each person. God didn't make any mistakes, buddy. Look in a mirror. And to say he did is confusing, lying, and undignifying. I desire that those I disagree with would stop seeking happiness and peace in their sexual identity and instead find hope and security in Jesus, the one who created them distinctly male and female, made for a relationship with him. And the board was like, sir, this is an Arby's. What the hell are you doing? And they were like, yeah, dog, we're getting rid of you because that didn't address any of our issues. And also, this guy just denied the existence of trans people. So, yeah, he didn't deserve to be working at a public school district. So, guess what's happening now? Because, again, all of that happened in like 2022, 2023. So now he's suing the school district. He's saying they forced me to violate my faith. And legally speaking, he said they fired him because of his sincerely held religious beliefs. And this is what his lawsuit says. As they explain, he spoke to the school board and he said in number 46 here, if my religious beliefs and personal liberty place me at odds, blah, 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 so be it. Well, they said, yeah, it's placing you at odds with us, and they fired him, and clearly he is not content. So be it, my ass. Okay, you clearly care. So again, look, it's completely irrelevant that this guy has a faith-based reason to belittle trans kids. If you can't respect your students by calling them by their names, why are you a teacher? Like, his form of hate, it might be fine in his Christian church. You expect it in certain Christian churches, but public schools have a responsibility to be an inclusive space where all students feel safe and wanted. And Cernak made it clear he could not treat trans kids like other students because he doesn't even think they're real. He thinks they're lying about it. He announced that in advance. So the school district had every right, if not a responsibility, to punish him for it. And again, they're not firing him because he's Christian. It's because of what he was doing. His refusal to follow the district's rules. If you're in like rural Wisconsin, how much you want to bet there are other Christians employed by the district? And how many of them probably disagree with the district's position on LGBTQ inclusivity? But it doesn't matter because they chose to work in a public school district, so they're obligated to follow the district's rules. This guy, on the other hand, thinks being a Christian gives him the right to mistreat his students. It's no wonder that it took a right-wing legal group, the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, to represent him, because it's not like a legitimate legal group is going to get on his side here. Listen, no one was asking this guy to accept trans people. No one was even asking him to care about those trans students. All he had to do was call them by their name. He refused to do it. And again, being a Christian is not a legitimate excuse to treat public school students like shit. This guy had no business working in a public school because he was fostering a classroom environment in which certain students would walk in knowing he looked down on them, that their very sense of being he thought was a mistake. He didn't want what was best for them because he's only concerned about what's best for him. You know, conservatives say this all the time, but guess what? A public school classroom is not a place to advance your personal agenda. And a quick side note to close off this story. When I was looking up this dude, turns out he graduated from Reformed Baptist Seminary. You can see it at the top left there. And they have a profile of this guy from April of this year, our friend Jordan Cernick. And okay, whatever. He's writing here, which I found interesting. This is clearly his self-written bio. But look at this. A few times while trying to preach the word, as I had seen modeled by some dude, and trying to put into practice what I had learned from my Reformed Baptist school training, seminary training, people would leave the middle of my sermon in disgust. One woman stared at me for an entire service with a hateful scorn. Well, the word of God is offensive. I pray I am not. He's basically saying all these people, even in church, seem to hate me. They're walking out. Isn't that cool, everybody? Like, I'm just preaching the word of God and these people hate it. What's wrong with them? I'm perfect, but they're problematic. And then later on, look at this little line here. Recently, I lost my job at the public school because I refused to go along with the farce of gender ideology. Even in our rural communities, this battle rages. Like he's pretending to be such a victim. It's so hard for a white guy in rural Wisconsin who is cisgender and straight. By the way, it says he's working for a local trucking company, so he has a job, and it also says he's serving as a pastor of an Illinois town that is right across the border of Kentucky. So he's working, he's fine. I don't know why he's suing, because it's clearly he doesn't want his job back. He can't do it. His brand of hate is alive and well. I'm just glad to hear it's not being unleashed at a public school. I will pause there for a second. Thank you for this donation, Nadia. Frank Schaefer, really good, interesting to watch. If you've never seen his clips on YouTube, go check him out. But old school religious right dude who has seen the light and speaks out against Christian hate now. Frank Schaefer says they're up to a lot more than just denying LGBT people's existences. He says their real plan is imprisonment and execution. There are some conservative Christians that have said some ridiculous, insane things. I would argue most conservative Christians even don't quite want to go that far. They would, but like they don't want to see gay people executed, even though some, new independent fundamentalist Baptist preachers might. But when it comes to like something like abortion, a lot of Christians, conservative Christians, do want to see abortion doctors behind bars or guilty of some crime and then subject to execution. I think that's what you're talking about. And again, if they win power, they would put harsh penalties, not just against abortion doctors. There are plenty of Christians who want to see punishments against women as well. So yeah, it's some scary stuff that is happening here. Thanks, Nadia, for that. And thank you, Olivia, for this. God doesn't make mistakes. I guess congenital diseases don't exist. Yeah, God makes a lot of mistakes. And then Christians always seem to find a way to rationalize them every single time, which is wild. Okay, I got one more story for you. This is a quick one, but I wanted to share this with you. Let me pull up this link really quick. I'm going to put this in the YouTube comments, and you can all share this with each other down the road. But let me get to this one last story that I'm really proud of. So I just want to share this with you. There is a long-standing belief in American politics that an openly non-religious candidate would be unelectable in the United States. And Gallup, every few years, Gallup does a poll where they ask people some version of the following question. Would you vote for a presidential candidate from your party if they were well qualified and they happen to be a blank? And if they said, like, imagine in the 1930s, if they said, would you vote for someone from your party if that person was qualified and a woman? And it wasn't that popular. What if they were well qualified and black? And it wasn't that popular. And over time, because Gallup has asked this question for a long time, you can see the trends shifting. Like when Barack Obama was running in 2007, 2008, like people got pretty comfortable voting for a black guy. Even before that, people got comfortable voting for a woman. At least that prejudice wasn't tripping them up as much as it used to. And so they just ran this poll recently, earlier this year. And I wanted to share with you what they found this time around. This is from Gallup. This is, I think, November of this year. And check this out. Who would you vote for? And you could see some interesting results here. Like 93% of voters say, yeah, this is Democrats and Republicans and everything else, they would vote for a woman. 93% said they are fine voting for someone who's Hispanic. 92% Catholic, Black, Jewish is up there. Look at gay or lesbian at 74%. I mean, it's not where I want it to be. I wish it were higher, but it's much higher than it used to be a decade or two ago, right? And so then we start scrolling down, and then we get to the interesting ones right here. Like, would you vote for a Muslim? 71%. Low, but higher than what it used to be. How about an old dude over the age of 70? Well, Biden was still in the race at the time, and Trump is obviously the oldest candidate ever at this point. 63% said, yeah, I guess so. Look down, over the age of 80, and now it's really low. Okay, but look at atheist. Only 60% of people would vote for an atheist, even if that person was their nominee. And I've always argued that the reason it's as low as it is because you've never seen an openly atheist presidential candidate. If there was one, you would see that number go up. Even socialist, thanks, Bernie, we're beating the socialists. Socialists is at 42%, but guess what? Before Bernie Sanders ever ran for president, that thing was like really low. So the fact that Bernie Sanders made it possible for a Democratic Socialist to be in the hunt meant more people got comfortable with it. So that's the idea. So being an open atheist is still hard if you're in politics. And there's a reason there's only one openly atheist member of Congress right now, Jared Huffman of California. But what I have found over the past several years is that at the state level, when people are running for state house and state senate, they are more likely to come out than ever before using their non-religious label. And this is fascinating to me because I'm like, I hope this doesn't hurt you politically. And a lot of candidates are saying, no, this is just who I am. I don't want to hide it from my constituents. Let me put it out there. I'm not running because I'm an atheist. I'm not running because I'm going to, legislate my atheism. But I'm an atheist who wants to help you fix the potholes. You know what I mean? That's how they're running, and they're not afraid of that. And so for the past several election cycles, I've been trying to track this with the help of the Center for Free Thought Equality, which is like the political arm of the American Humanist Association. And this week, I was finally able to publish my spreadsheet of these candidates. And this is the link I shared earlier. I'll leave it in the YouTube notes below. But this is a list of the members of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, the candidates for U.S. House who are literally, they're running to be in Congress, and they are, as you could see right over here, they are atheist, apatheist, agnostic, not religiously affiliated. Like they run the gamut of non-religious labels. And again, most of those people running for Congress, they're doing it in deep red districts. They probably will lose, but if and when that happens, they're not going to, I promise you this, they're not going to lose because they're non-religious. They're going to lose because any Democrat in those races is going to have a rough go. But all those people won their primaries. they're the candidate on the ballot this November. And then we get to the state legislatures. And I know there's a lot of information here. The ones in light blue, like right over here, those ones in light blue, they haven't had their primaries yet. Those are coming up in the next couple of weeks. But everyone else on this list, they have won their primaries. They are on the ballot come November. The people in green have already won their races because they're unopposed or they're not on the ballot this time around. Look at how many openly non-religious candidates are on the ballot, either in the primary or by and large this November. There are so many, and there are so many across the country in so many different states. It's amazing. A lot of them are challengers, yes, but if you look at the far left column, you could see there are a hell of a lot of incumbents, the people who are already in office, and they're not afraid of coming out as non-religious. That's exciting to see as well. Another thing I found when I was compiling this list that stuck out to me, there are 2 Republicans on the list. One of them is a New Hampshire state representative. His name is Brandon Finney. He has an interesting story because he was voted in as a Republican. I'm the one that outed him because he was public about it, just not in a big way. I'm like, does the public know you're an atheist? Because you're saying it on like Facebook and stuff. And he's like, everyone, my friends know I'm an atheist. So he was like the only Republican atheist for a while in state office. And then he decided to become a libertarian. And then he ran for office as a libertarian and lost because the Republican won. And now he's running again. He ran last cycle in 2022 as a Republican, got voted back into the New Hampshire State House, and now he's running again as a Republican atheist. So that's interesting. There's also a Colorado state representative, Ryan Armagost, who says he's agnostic, and yet he believes in a higher power or something like that. I don't know how to make sense of it, but I don't know how Republicans think about a lot of things. So there you go. I counted about 70 nuns running for re-election, incumbents running for re-election to the state house or state senate, and about like 150, 160 people on the ballot this November. And I literally updated that list as of today as I'm making this video because I heard from a candidate who said, how come I'm not on your list? I'm an atheist. And I'm like, oh, add them in. So like, again, it doesn't matter that most of these candidates, because they are challengers, because they're running in red district, it doesn't matter that they will lose. Sorry, they will. They probably will. But the fact that they're on the ballot, they have this greater ability to just be themselves. Because when you think you have nothing to lose, you might as well go out to your constituents and say, look, this is who I am. This is what I stand for. I don't have to play it safe. So I want your vote. And you know what? If you live in a red state or you live in a red district, I promise you that a lot of progressive voters are so desperately looking for a candidate they can actually support that when there's an option on the ballot, it doesn't matter if that option is going to lose. They're really excited to go out and vote. And in that sense, you actually get this bottom-up effect. Like the Kamala Harris's and the governors and things like that, they get to ride the coattails of those local races because someone who wasn't going to vote in a red state, because why does it matter, decides, I want to vote for this blue candidate who's an open atheist. Holy crap. I'm going to vote for them. And while I'm here, I might as well vote for Kamala Harris. You know what I mean? So that's exciting too. That's important. And again, I used to think it would be impossible to find openly atheistic candidates, and there are so many now. So by coming out as non-religious too, you know, they're never making it the center of their campaigns, but they are making it easier for other people to follow in their footsteps. I think this is the 4th year I've put together a spreadsheet like this, and the number of candidates have always gone up. Every single time. It keeps rising, which is super exciting. And so I just wanted to share that with you. I will leave a link to the spreadsheet in the YouTube video for this. But check out the list. If you know anyone who's running, who's not on the list, that should be on the list, I would love to add them. And that's what I'm going to be doing election night. I want to update that list and find out how many winners there are, because I think that'll say a lot about where we're heading in states, as a country, etc. And I'll thanks for starring this here. Hema, when are you gonna run? I've spent 20 years writing oppositional material about myself for anyone I'm running against. So that's a horrible, horrible idea. But I'm not saying that as a hypocrite. I'm not saying everyone has to run, but I'm saying there's a lot of people who have no reason not to run. Like they totally could run, and they just think I'm not the most qualified, or they think, it's a lot of work. I don't know what to do. There are so many organizations that will help you do it. I will tell you a quick story, I swear, then I'll shut up. I write about national politics and religion and all that stuff, but it's usually on a national or state level. And I realized, you know what? I don't know about what's happening locally. I don't know the candidates who are running in my hometown. I totally know who's running for like state and Congress and stuff like that, but I don't know what's happening in my hometown. So recently, for the first time, I went to a meeting of like Democrats in my area, and it was awesome. Like, I want to get involved now. Doesn't mean I'm going to run because I actually want Democrats to win. But the problem I see so many times is the people you want to be on the school board and on city council and things like that. Those are usually the ones that have the most anxiety about running, whereas religious extremists, Republicans of all stripes, who have no business in those seats and are the dumbest people you've ever met, they're like, you know what I should do? I should run for the highest office I can possibly get. And because they're on the ballot, they have a chance to win. And sometimes they do, and it's really bad. So please consider running for something. It doesn't have to be a big deal. Run for something local if you can. We need more smart, sensible people. And I just want to make this caveat clear in case it's not clear. I am not saying that every non-religious person, even on that spreadsheet, I'm not saying they are all good politicians or even ones I support. And I'm definitely not saying that religious candidates are not people I would support. I've voted for religious people in every election I've ever voted for, oftentimes very happily. But it would be nice and it would help break the stigma if we had more non-religious candidates. And part of the reason for that is if you think about who are the most famous atheists you can think of, it's probably someone who's written a book, those like new atheist authors. Maybe it's a comedian. Maybe it's a famous scientist, something like that. Those are probably the famous atheists, or some idiot who argues on YouTube about random stuff. But what is the job of a politician, especially at the state level where they don't get a lot of media coverage? You know what I mean? What's the job of a politician? In theory, it's to make everybody else's life better. Like, there is no job you can do outside of like ER doctor, you know what I mean? Or cancer doctor, where your job is to help other people and you have the power to do it and take votes on that. And I think if we had more atheists in public office, this theoretically selfless job, a public service job, it would actually decrease the stigma of that word atheist. Because imagine what the conversations would be like if it's like, oh, here's an atheist in the news and they're fighting against chaplains in schools, which I support, but it's not heartwarming, versus here's an atheist in office who is fighting to make sure kids can get free lunch in schools. Think about what that would do. That would be huge. So again, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be at the state level. It could be school board. It could be city council. It could be local school district. Park district. Whatever it is, run for something. It's important. All right. I think I'm gonna call it a night. Thank you for everyone for participating. Shout out to Michael who's been trying to help me get the important comments up here all night. We are gonna get the tech worked out, and he'll be hopefully back next time so we can get this working. And if anyone knows what's happening with Den, please let me know. I miss Den too. Thank you so much. And you know the drill. You can subscribe to my newsletter right over there. You could subscribe to my channel, patreon.com/Hemant. I will be back next Friday. It should be Friday for a while after this. And thanks for sticking around, everybody. See you soon.